Two women found dead with stab wounds at a Wan Chai service apartment. Lechko president calls suggested resignations of lawmakers to trigger de facto referendum on political reform not constructive. And a Virgin Galactic spaceship crashes during a test flight.
Good evening and welcome to TVB News. Police have arrested the tenant of a service department in Wan Chai where two women were found dead with stab wounds. The suspect is a 29-year-old expatriate man who works in Hong Kong. Liz Yoon has more details.
Police officers responding to a call arrived at this building on Johnston Road just before 4 a.m. They found a naked woman lying unconscious in an apartment. Police say the victim, an expatriate woman aged between 25 and 30, sustained cut wounds to her neck and buttock. She was later certified dead. Officers seized a sharp kitchen knife from the premises. They arrested the 29-year-old expatriate man who called the police on suspicion of murder. The man holds a Hong Kong identification card and works in the city. Police believe the victim was his friend, and the two were suspected to have been involved in a struggle. Authorities then cordoned off the building for further investigation. At around noon, officers made another discovery on the balcony of the flat, a second female body.
For the second dead body, we found that it contained a suitcase, a travel suitcase. When they opened the briefcase, we found the leg of the dead body. For the upper body, it was covered by the blanket.
According to the police, the second victim appeared to have been dead for some time. Based on the preliminary investigation, the police said both victims suffered knife wounds to their throats. The police said further investigation is required to find out if more people are involved in the two suspected murders. Post-mortem examinations will be conducted to determine the two victims' actual causes of death. Liz Yoon, TVB News.
It's day 35 of the Occupy protests and demonstrators are still out in force. You're looking at live pictures of the Admiralty and Mong Kok protest sites. As you can see, there's still plenty of people out. In Mong Kok, there are both supporters and opponents of the protests. Now, the Legislative Council president has brushed aside Occupy protesters' calls for pan-democratic lawmakers to resign to trigger by-elections as a de facto referendum on political reform issues. Zhang Yuxing also thinks it would not serve any constructive purpose for the chief executive to dissolve the legislature if the government's political reform bill fails to pass in Lechko. Evelina Leung reports.
Occupy movement protesters continue their attempts to put pressure on the government in their fight for genuine universal suffrage, more than a month after the campaign began. Student leaders have been discussing with some pan-democratic lawmakers on whether they should resign to trigger a de facto referendum on political reform issues. They claim this would become a stage for Hong Kong people to raise their voices on the government's proposed political reform package. Democratic Party chairwoman Emily Lau announced today the Pan-Democrats are contemplating the idea.
My party and the Pan-Democratic legislators also think it's worth considering. So we are holding meetings quite regularly to discuss it. But I think there's a long way to go. And if you read in the news media, there are people with very different views. Some are very, very much against it, and there are some who are very supportive. So I think we have to listen very calmly and to reach a decision on whether we go forward or not.
Yet Chan Wing-Ki, a member of the Standing Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, argued a de facto referendum is not lawful. He added the only way to end the current crisis is to end the Occupy movement. Chan was backed by Lechko President Zhang Yuxing, who said the action won't solve the problem. He also said the same for Occupy Central Organizer Benny Tai's suggestion for the chief executive to dissolve the legislature if the government's political reform bill doesn't pass Lechko.
Whether the chief executive will or should dissolve the Legislative Council I do not see any reason why the chief executive should do so. What productive, positive consequence can come from such an act by the chief executive? I don't see any reason at all for doing that.
Some pan-democratic lawmakers agreed, saying this doesn't comply with the basic law. They also questioned why they have to put their legislative seat at risk. Evelyn Lang, TVB News.
Former Liberal Party leader James Tian said today his dismissal from the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, or the CPPCC, is a strong message from Beijing that Hong Kong people have to respect China's sovereignty over the territory. Speaking in an interview with TVB, Tian also reiterated that he is not vying for the chief executive position. Owen Fung reports.
James Tian was stripped of his CPPCC membership 3 days ago after calling on Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying to consider resigning. Today, Tian believes his dismissal is not only about his remark last week.
Dismissing me as a member of the CPPCC, I think, is the least of the problem or the message they want to give. The bigger message must be that after so many years, the Hong Kong peoples on striking the right balance between one country, two systems, is not only thinking about two systems. To us, a lot of people, the one country is just by name, it's not by reality. So the point of who has sovereignty over Hong Kong is the main issue for Beijing.
Tian has gained popularity among some members of the public since the incident. So would he consider running for chief executive in the future?
I could say that's definitely not on my mind. It's really a thankless job. I don't think I'm qualified to do it, and I have no interest in doing it.
Tian thinks Beijing will not change its stance on political reform in Hong Kong. But he agrees that there's room to make the nominating committee for the 2017 CE election more representative, particularly in regards to corporate votes.
This, I think, we could certainly expand. But to what extent? I would say probably to involve the senior management of the company, but not to an extent where all workers of that particular company will be involved.
Tian added that permitting all voters to participate in the selection process of the nominating committee is akin to civil nomination, which would not be acceptable to Beijing. Owen Fung, TVB News.
More banners in support of the Occupy movement were spotted at two country parks. Both have now been removed. A banner with the words, "I want true universal suffrage," similar to the one hung from the top of Lion Rock earlier, was spotted hanging from a cliff at Fei On Shan yesterday. It falls within the Ma An Shan Country Park. This afternoon, the staff from the Fire Services Department and Civil Aid Service removed the banner. The Fire Services Department cited public safety for the decision. Meanwhile, a banner carrying the same message was hung outside the radar station on top of Tai Mo Shan. It's part of the Tai Mo Shan Country Park. That banner was also removed. It is illegal to display posters or banners at country parks without permission. The maximum penalty for the offense is a fine of up to $2,000 and 3 months in prison.
Tensions at the Mong Kok Occupy protest site flared once again overnight and during the early morning hours. An attempt to pay a visit to the area by Patrick Koh, leader of the anti-Occupy group Voice of Loving Hong Kong, led to scuffles between protesters and police. Angry at Koh's presence, demonstrators hurled insults at him. Police had to intervene. 2 officers were injured during the chaos. A 35-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of assaulting the police. Financial Secretary John Tsang said today there are no plans to modify the linked exchange rate system. He maintained that the system is the most appropriate one for Hong Kong at the moment. Here's Owen Fong again.
Speaking to the press after his trip to Europe, Financial Secretary John Tsang said the international community is not concerned by the Occupy movement. However, he added that Hong Kong society should reflect on how to maintain the rule of law, as he thinks recent events could threaten it. Yesterday, HSBC's Asia-Pacific Chief Executive Peter Wong called for a review of the Hong Kong dollar's future, which included the suggestion of replacing the Hong Kong dollar with the renminbi as the local currency. In response, the financial secretary says he welcomes academic discussions on the future of the Hong Kong dollar. But Tang emphasized that there are currently no plans to alter the linked exchange rate system, as he believes it's the most suitable for Hong Kong's small but open economy. And on the Shanghai-Hong Kong Stock Connect scheme, Tang said he doesn't think the delay is connected with the Occupy protests. But he declined to speculate on reasons for the delay. During his trip to London, Tang addressed a luncheon organised by the Hong Kong Association where he identified political reform as the cause of the ongoing Occupy protests. He further stated that, while he completely understands Hong Kong residents' demands, he also thinks that having universal suffrage is better than an election committee of 1,200 people. Tang said the government will strive to build consensus, but Hong Kong residents ultimately hold the key to implementing universal suffrage. The financial secretary will go on another trip to Beijing from next Monday to Wednesday, along with Norman Chan, chief executive of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. The pair will meet with officials in the Ministry of Commerce and the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, as well as officials in charge of financial and monetary policies. Owen Fung, TVB News.
Elsewhere tonight, a winged spaceship designed by Virgin Galactic to take tourists on trips above the Earth's atmosphere has crashed. One pilot was killed and another seriously injured after parachuting out of the craft. Alan Booknia reports.
Virgin Galactic Spaceship 2 crashed in the Mojave Desert about 200 kilometers north of Los Angeles. The 18-meter-long spaceship is attached to a mothership that releases it before it would go beyond the Earth's atmosphere. This was only the fourth test flight to include a brief rocket firing. But in this case, the craft blew apart shortly after its release. The cause is not immediately known. The difference on this flight was the type of fuel being used, although it had been tested extensively on the ground. Investigators found debris scattered for kilometers across the desert.
Because we have two military bases and we have crashes occasionally, and you can no longer recognize an aircraft in most of those crashes because they impact the ground. And in this one, from the air, I could read the Virgin on the side of one of the pieces, so that's how large the pieces were.
One pilot was found dead, still in the aircraft. The other was airlifted to a hospital by helicopter after parachuting out. Richard Branson, the founder of Virgin Group, tweeted while he was en route to Mojave, shocked and saddened by tragic loss. He added, "Space is hard, but worth it. We will persevere and move forward together." Virgin Galactic was considered the frontrunner among a handful of companies attempting to pioneer tourist space travel. There had been talk of operating commercial flights by next spring. 800 people have already paid or put down deposits to ride on Spaceship 2. Tickets sell for $250,000 US. The crash marks the second fiery setback for commercial space travel in less than a week. On Tuesday in Virginia, an Orbital Sciences Antares rocket exploded during liftoff on a mission to deliver cargo to the International Space Station for NASA. Alan Booknia, TVB News.
Well, meanwhile, China today successfully recovered an experimental spacecraft that orbited the moon. The ship returned to Earth using a Soviet-designed method in which it first bounced off the atmosphere in order to slow its entry speed and avoid burning up. It then landed in Inner Mongolia just before dawn. The 8-day trip marked the first time in almost 4 decades that a spacecraft has returned to Earth after traveling around the moon. The flight was a test run for the Chang'e 5, China's first unmanned return trip to the lunar surface, expected in 2017. If successful, the mission would make China just the third country after the United States and Russia to achieve the feat.
And still ahead in the news tonight. A nurse in Maine has her quarantine overturned. In Hungary, an internet tax plan put on hold. And confusion over who's in charge in the African country of Burkina Faso.